Thank you so much, and it's without further ado that I introduce a really wonderful person and great soul, Nancy Talbott. Thank you.
I'm very honored to be here. I have loved this conference for a long time and have grown over the years from one kind of person to, I think, perhaps a little bit larger person. And this is at least partly due to Chet and Callista themselves and the wonderful people who come to this sort of conference. I know that if you're here, you probably are farther down this road than I am. But tonight, what I wanted to talk about was how I went from initially understanding, the very first time, in fact, that I ever saw a crop circle, an intuitive knowing that there was something going on beyond mechanical flattening, to then being completely aware, because I was raised in an academic community, and as Chet knows, as being an academic, if you're trying to encourage professionally trained people to open their minds and ideas to a larger reality, it's really quite a job. And I knew that if we could get some scientific work done on the circles, in particular the plants and soils, and if in fact they revealed changes, physical changes, that could not be accounted for by mechanical flattening, that this might then open the door for people like my mother. I mean, it sounds corny, but my mother was very academically trained herself and wouldn't even listen. And I didn't like the idea of her and other people like her being excluded, not having the opportunity to learn what I intuitively felt but could not begin to prove, of course. I mean, my telling you that X has happened and Y and whatever, well, anybody can say that. So I then spent the next 10, 11, 12 years, I've been doing this now for 20 years, and the BLT research group, which at the time consisted of William Levengood, John Burke, and myself, did do, as most everybody here knows, a lot of plant and soil work, and we were then able to carry out this X-ray diffraction study, which definitively, 100%, shows that mechanical flattening of the plants and soils is not the answer. I mean, it is for the ones that are man-made, but it is not for the rest of them. So, it wasn't until, I think, 1996 that I first heard of this young man in Holland about whom we're going to be talking tonight. And what I've done is put together I only had room really for 12. There are many more, but I tried to pick 12 representative incidents which I personally was directly involved in and witnessed over these last 14, 15 years that I've been working with Robbert, to show you how I went from absolute indifference, really, in 1996, to a gradual, that's an interesting coincidence. Oh, another coincidence. And finally to now, an absolute certainty that there is a consciousness involved. Robbert is positive it is a cosmic consciousness. I'm not a medium. I'm not positive of that. But what I'm going to try and do is show you the events which have slowly shown me that this can't possibly be coincidence over and over. We're sitting on the second night in the house, and the lights in the room were mostly off, just talking about various events that had gone on. And the father was telling me that he had seen flashes of light from time to time out in this garden, and they had seen other kind of light phenomena, but nothing too dramatic. And all of a sudden, the father yelled and pointed out this window and said, "There, there." He had just seen one of these flashes of light. I had my back to the window, so of course I didn't see anything. I turned the chair around, and we turned all of the lights off downstairs completely. And the three of us sat there in total silence, and this tingling began. And it started, all three of us were sitting, And it started at our waist and slowly moved up our chests, our back, our sides. And by the time it got up here to my neck, it had become very intense. And I got scared. And I thought to myself, the hell with science, I'm getting out of here. And at exactly the incident, at exactly the moment that I had that thought, which I really was scared, the tingling stopped completely, and this incredible light show then ensued out in the garden. I didn't know where to look. It was like a three-ring circus. It was incredible. And the flashes and the lights and the blobs and the balls and everything were in a very confined space, and they stayed there for 15, 20 seconds, and then they stopped. And nobody said a word. There wasn't a sound in the house. And after a couple of minutes, the tingling started again. Well, this whole thing went on. We know it was 5 times. It might have been 7. And it would build up and build up and build up, and it would reach a place for me where I really was scared, thought that was too much. And the second I would have that idea, it stopped. And then the light show would start again. And the father was, I think we can accurately say, terrified. His wife was a little less so, but a little ill at ease with the whole thing. I was getting fascinated because it was nothing, nobody was being hurt, and mostly, and this is the important thing to know here, my wishes were being respected. When it reached a point that was too much for me, it stopped. And this is the first indicator, the first of the things I want you to notice about the events that go on around Robbert. Free will and respect for the rights of others, for all people, is a critical aspect of these events, and totally unlike the creatures and the beings that we hear about who are associated with the abduction phenomenon, who are associated with what Robbert calls mind control. Whatever this energy is that is around him is the opposite of that. Well, after the night, we finally, after 5 of these events, I turned around to the 2 of them and said, well, that's it, like I'm God talking. I have no idea how I knew it. I have no idea why I said it, but it was, in fact, over. And the next day, I was very interested to examine these trees, the arrows pointing to some cedar trees very close to the windows, where the bulk of this energy seemed to me to emanate from. And I wanted to examine those trees. So the next day we went out and I did examine the trees. And at that time, because I'm not technically very sophisticated, although the AV guys here, Ted and Charles, are doing their best to help me, I'm learning, I'm getting better. But at that time, all I had was a film camera. And so I went around to these trees and I was standing very close to them. And if you look up at the balcony, that's where the ball of light had rotated. If you see that little birdhouse, I'm not sure, on the wall, it was burned. The roof of it was burned with the same energy that had done the ball of light. It's a birdhouse that Robbert made when he was a kid. At any rate, while I'm standing next to this tree, the camera goes off all by itself, takes shot 18, then it takes shot 19, and then it rewinds, even though there were 36 images available on the film. It did it all by itself. This is a close-up of the anomaly in frame 19. See this? How the light extends outside the actual area on the film. This was the second odd coincidence. Strange thing, you know, as far as I was concerned at that point. It's like, wow, that's odd. This is a picture of Robbert back then with his mother and me in one of the circles in 1998. We did get to go out in the fields and look at some of them. And if you see, as you will see, some of these circles, they look just like they do anywhere else, although they tend overall to not be as ornate, as complex as the ones you see in England. But it must be said and should be remembered by everybody that many of these intricate and ornate things in England, although some of them are genuine, a lot of them aren't. And so when you get into this thing of wanting to interpret meaning, if you don't know whether it's real to begin with, I think you're kind of spinning your wheels. In this particular circle, this was in, 1999. There was an amazing series of events that year. Out Robert's back balcony, he observed on one occasion earlier in the summer a pinkish purple light ball, which he described as being kind of football shaped, which came in over the field slowly and fairly low, then elongated itself into a disc-shaped light, and he was very clear about it being a light, not a UFO. This was a light, which then discharged an energy which he says was, back then his English was nowhere near as good as it is now, and he said, like the shuttle, like the shuttle. He meant he saw energy coming down to the crop surface. He got out to that field. At that time, there was not a fence separating his backyard from that farm field, and he could get out there, and he did right away, and reported that the ground was still warm, in this brand new circle, which had just appeared. He called me right away, or his parents did, and told me about this particular circle, and I immediately wanted to get over there and sample it, because when you have an eyewitness whom you trust, and in this case I did trust him, I thought it was very important to get it sampled. I didn't have the money at the time to go, and so I called Elcho Hasselhoff, who has a degree in physics and was at least a crop circle enthusiast. And he lived close. He lived in Utrecht, I think. And so he could get there a lot easier than I could. And I devised a sampling diagram and then simply asked him to sample this circle for us. And here I'm using these graphs of Elcho's because they're very easy to read. Here, what we're looking at, the green bars show you the average length of the apical node, the top node, in the controls. And here we have one circle, the pink-purple light circle, with 3 different diagonals which have been sampled. And what's fascinating, and I have no idea how to explain this, and I don't think there are any scientists here or anywhere else actually who can explain this at the time. If you notice the center, the highest point here, it indicates this center sample. The node length change was greatest in the center sample and then dropped off evenly on both sides of each diameter. But if you notice, the way they drop off is different in each of the diameters. There are no 2 of them are the same. How in the world does a rotating delivery system produce on both sides of one diameter exactly the same node length change? And yet in the very next diameter, which would only be a short distance away, produce a different kind of node length change. Elcho was certain that for him, and this is typical in the science arena, that this particular demonstration indicated a point source of light hung above the crop field as Robbert had described. I want to show you, this is the 3rd event in my series here of 12, and I'm simply showing you Robert's house, and the backyard is much bigger now. This pool has been put in, but this is the location of this particular event. Robbert and I had been that year all over the place. I was dragging a magnetometer around for Dr. William Roll, a parapsychologist, and I was trying to see if we could find any geomagnetic anomalies in these places where crop circles occur around Robbert. It was an extremely frustrating several weeks because it was hot. I had to climb up over dikes and barbed wire fences and lug all this equipment, and we were getting nothing. I mean, absolutely nothing unusual unless we stood underneath these power lines, and then we would get something unusual. So I was pretty disgusted. And Robbert and I were talking, we were sitting down in the kitchen where that arrow says Robbert, and he wanted to go back out into some of the circles that were present that year because he was starting to get lots of anomalies, which he liked. He was enjoying this. And I was so disgusted, I said, I am sick and tired of this phenomenon. It is too hard to study. Why the hell can't it be more direct? And I marched myself up to the bedroom, which is right here. Opened the doors wide because it was hot as it could be, and got into bed. I was going to read for a while. before going to sleep. Robbert stayed down here in the kitchen, and as you can see, both sets of windows are looking out toward the field. A few minutes into my reading, I heard the cattle start to bawl down at the end of the field. Now, I had visited Robbert, I don't know, 4 times by then. I didn't even know there were cattle down there. They had never made any noise before. But part of my job when we were doing all the plant and soil work was to talk to the owners, the farmers, the landowners, and get as much information as I could from them. They consistently would tell me if they had cattle or horses or dogs or whatever, that the animals would raise hell when a crop circle was getting ready to go down. So when I heard the cattle the first time, I thought, oh, something's getting ready to happen. And I don't quite know why I didn't. I knew if I got up and went and stood on that balcony, I might get to see the whole thing. But for some reason, I didn't. And I went back to reading. The cattle became quiet. And then all of a sudden, they started to bawl so raucously, I knew that whatever it was getting ready. And this is what it was. This is a diagram because I didn't have a camera sitting right there ready for it. But this brilliant tube of light came shooting down from the sky. The force involved is beyond anything I could explain to you. Whatever this was, it was perfectly straight, tube-like. There was a spiral motion inside. Well, this occurred, a few seconds elapsed, then another one came. By now, I realize I'm not dreaming, that yes, this is happening. And I'm wondering if Robert's seen it from downstairs. And he's starting to run. He's seen 2 of them come, so he's starting to yell my name and running up the stairs. And I'm yelling for him, and I saw the 3rd one come down. He didn't because he was on the stairwell. The next morning, that night we went out and checked, and it was right there. But the next morning, from my bedroom, from my bed, I didn't have to get out of bed to see this. Actually, it was an ellipse with a long pathway and a crossbar like the capital letter T. And Robbert said, that one's for you. I thought, okay. I mean, again, a coincidence. I mean, how in the world would whatever is making crop circles know where I am on August 21st, 2001? Why would it care? I mean, I don't know. Now I've changed my mind about that being a coincidence, but back then I was sure that that was just a coincidence and that Robbert had a romantic notion. This is what it looked like, actually. His father used to do very nice diagrams. And that shows you the top of the T, and you can see how close it is to the house. This is the string bean field. And here are the string beans. It was one big arc flattened this way and the other arc flattened the other. I saw when I got in there that the beans were fully mature, and so I picked a whole bunch and cooked them for dinner. Robbert wouldn't touch them. I think he was afraid he'd light up or something. This is what the circle looked like from the field itself, and you can see its proximity to the house. Now, it's very interesting that I am the only person in the world who has been part of and involved in all of the published scientific work that's been done on crop circles so far. I am also the only researcher who has actually seen not 1, but 2 crop circles form right in front of my face. And on top of that, I'm the only person who's had this 15-year experience with Robbert. Suddenly, he was behind the desk. I was on the other side with my little camera, my film camera. And by then I had a digital camera, I'm sorry. And no other cameras in the room, nothing else. And on this door, this picture was taken at some other time, but on this door, which goes to the outside, that's the door through which his clients come if they're coming for a reading or a healing. We suddenly, both of us, heard this very quiet tap, tap, tap. Now, again, I mean, I've learned from then, but it was so quiet, it was so gentle, I would never have known to pay attention. Robbert looked up immediately and said, "Did you hear that?" And I knew right away something was getting ready to happen. I said, "Yes." And he came around from his side of the desk. He never touches my camera unless I hand it to him. I go to Europe with all new chips, all numbered in my handwriting. There's a new one put in the camera every single day. A new chip, new batteries, etc. put in, so the next day we start fresh. And I've still got all these chips. So in this case, we've got some things on this particular chip because I've been shooting the compass. He comes around, asks if he can have the camera. I handed it to him, and I was standing with my head right next to his. We're very close. We get along very well. So, but head to head is fine. And I can see the LED screen as he holds the camera up. That's what happened, the first shot. Now, I'm looking with my eyes past the camera, and there's nothing but air. I can see the door very clearly, and I don't see anything but air between the door and that camera. But the face was clear as a bell. I jumped like I'd been shot. That really startled me. He had told me by this time that images of people who had died were appearing. But I never tell the public, until lately, I have never told the public anything that I have not personally witnessed. I don't want to mislead anybody. I want to be sure that what I'm talking about is totally truthful. I just don't want misinformation out. So I have not, now it may change a little bit because of some things that are happening, but up till now, I've never, until I personally have witnessed it, I haven't said a word. Now, Dr. Roll, for whom I had several times done some work with Robbert, managed to come and visit us in 2008, and here he is with Robbert at the special field. I've been keeping him informed of what goes on, and he had wanted to meet Robbert and observe. He bought a brand new camera for the occasion, and the very first shot Robbert took with it was that, with Dr. Roll standing right there. In 2009, many UFO photos were coming on the cameras. Many. They had never done this before. This was brand new. And Robbert says, and I feel this also, it was my first instinct, that the UFO image is perhaps the most widely known image in the world, regardless of your religious belief or lack thereof, that indicates other, not here, not from here, from somewhere else, other. And that the reason the UFO images are appearing and did appear in such massive abundance was not so much to indicate UFO extraterrestrial creatures from Mars or something, but more to say other. There is more out there. There's a lot you don't know yet. That's what he believes the images represent, and I'm just going to show you some of them. This is in one of the crop circle fields. All the people, these are people who come to visit the crop circles and ask Robbert to use their camera, which he does. And then all these interesting things occur. That guy I personally told, I was out on the road trying to get people's names and addresses and everything so I could get the photos later. He came up to me and he said he knew me from one of the movies. And he asked me if Robbert was out in the field. And I said, yes, and I pointed him out. I said, if you go up to him and give him your camera, ask him, maybe he'll take a couple shots for you. And so he walked right out and gave it to Robbert. Click, click. Here comes, this was a very interesting UFO. Now, as we were in Zevenbergen for one of the last times, this is with my camera and me, Robbert got a series of daytime UFOs, and this one, the first one of this shot, is kind of translucent. And then as you can see, it becomes less and less transparent. Here's another one that he got just last year with somebody else's camera.